And welcome to Working with, Employing and Teaching People Who Stammer, a seminar for employers, educators, HR professionals and managers about ways to create an inclusive environment for people who stammer at your workplace, school, university or institution. We have three panelists today discussing key issues regarding people who stammer and sharing ideas on how to move forward. There will also be an opportunity for Q&A at the end of the session. So to introduce myself, my name is Suzana, and I'm a person who stammers. I'm a past president of King's Speakers, which is a specialist Toastmaster club for people who stammer or have social anxiety. I also mentor people and run workshops, and I host my own podcast as well. But to get us started, we're actually going to do a quick poll just to get an overview of the current environment for people who stammer. So the poll will appear on your screen, and we'd be very grateful if you could quickly submit your response. Okay, brilliant. You will also be able to send any questions in the chat feature during the discussion. And if we don't cover your question during the session, please email help@stamma.org with your question and we'll get back to you as soon as possible. So I'd like to introduce the panelists that we have today. We have Abed Ahmed. I think he hasn't arrived yet. He's a maths teacher with a stammer and who helps young stammerers. We have Professor Deborah Johnston, who's a member of the Disabled Students Commission and a person who stammers. In April 2020, she became PVC of Education at London South Bank University. She was previously the Pro-Director of Learning and Teaching at SOAS University of London. And the Disabled Students Commission provides the opportunity to look at the breadth of advice and challenge for universities. We also have Walter Scott, who has worked at the Ministry of Defence for nearly 18 years and in publishing before that. He is a communication specialist, currently focused on corporate transformation and climate change and sustainability issues. He co-founded the Defence Stammering Network in 2014 and gave a TED Talk on stammering in 2018. And last year contributed a chapter to the book, Stammering, Pride and Prejudice. So welcome everyone to the discussion. I'd like to get things started with, maybe let's have a think about what are the common stereotypes or myths that people may have, or prejudices that they may have around people who stammer. What have been some of your experiences? Deborah, would you like to start?
So I'll kick off, and I guess I could talk about my personal experiences and that really annoying thing when someone says to you, you know, don't be nervous, don't be nervous. And I'm thinking, well, I'm not, it's not my nerves that are making me stammer, although actually my stammer might make me more nervous. Or that awful thing where someone says, have you forgotten your name? Because so in the past, I've had a problem with the D sound at the beginning of Deborah. And that's just, you know, so those sorts of comments have been really awful. And perhaps one of the most kind of crushing one was when I was in a meeting and I had to kind of say the name of the place that I was. And I struggled. It was a multi-syllable name, which is the kind of sound that I might typically have problems with, and they laughed. And I was coming in as a, you know, in a senior role, and that was really, you know, that kind of thing is still difficult. I still find it makes me angry, but that anger is a good anger, I think, because if it takes us forward and helps us reflect, I think that's a positive thing.
I think just to follow up on that, the other sort of stereotype that I've felt attributed to me is that I'm not entirely confident or certain of what I'm talking about. And in a work situation, in a meeting or in an open plan office, or if you're presenting, you are, of course, to some extent being continually assessed for your competence and your ability to do what you are doing. And I've often experienced quite kind of small, trivial, micro aggressions, you might call them, almost, but just people questioning whether I know exactly what it is that I'm talking about. And then when it comes to being the person picked to give the presentation, or in the civil service, the person picked to go and brief the minister or whoever, I've always just had this very slight sense that I'm being slightly passed over for opportunities that I'd be quite capable of taking up, but because of this sort of mystery around how I speak and a general lack of understanding of what's causing the disfluency.
And what do you think, what can be done about dismantling some of these stereotypes?
So I could try an answer to that. I do think that clarity about the sources of stammering, the reasons that we stammer, is part of the story. And I'm reflecting on the academic research that's in this space. And interestingly, there has been quite a lot of academic research done about the way that people, about the extent to which people create social distance. So people that don't stammer, their views on people that do. And actually, interestingly, a lot of it has happened in universities, so we can come back to actually about what that means for the university environment. But I do think that there's so there is some evidence that when fluent people and actually the population generally is more aware of the physiological causes of stammering, they can be they can assess it in a less negative way.
Yes, I completely agree about making clear the root cause of stammering. It's quite hard to know in a kind of employment situation how to go about doing that, what the obvious opportunities are to tell people that I'm not stammering because I'm nervous or I'm completely ignorant about my subject matter. It's because the white matter pathway in my brain is slightly compromised. I've tended to try and drop it into conversations with my immediate colleagues and team, so that I make sure that everyone who works immediately around me understands about the kind of neurological root cause of stammering. But of course, if you've got any sort of staff network to support diversity or inclusion or disability, there are always communications opportunities there. And I think quite often that physiological root cause key message is one that doesn't perhaps come across in stammering related communications as clearly as it could.
So it just leads me to the point, where do you, who do you think is responsible then for, who's responsible for creating more clarity and communicating this more clearly? Does the responsibility lie on people who stammer, on organizations for people who stammer, or is it for the employers or for the school system to take that responsibility, or is it something that we need to work together on?
I think it's got to begin with people who stammer, but when they find the confidence to stand up in a professional environment, as I might say, Abed, who's just joined us, has done exactly that in schools and in education. It is totally incumbent on the employer to be ready for them to do that and to give them 100% support and communications opportunities when they do that. When I co-founded the Defence Stammering Network in late 2014, we were doing it with certain trepidation because this was partly targeted at the armed forces, and you can imagine the assumptions that you might make in the armed forces about stammering. But we were amazed by how quickly we got support at the most senior levels of all the three armed forces and our civil service. So to me, that was exemplary stuff, but I think it's got to begin in the first instance with somebody or a few people who stammer teaming up and saying, we're going to make that change.
Yeah. And Abed, I'd like to welcome you for joining us. And so we were just discussing about who is responsible for having clear communication around the causes of stammering. What does it mean to have a stammer? Is it the person who has a stammer, or the organizations that support those who stammer, or is it the responsibility of the employer or the education system? What are your thoughts on that? I think you're on mute. I'm not able to hear your audio. Can anybody else hear it?
No one else.
Oh, we can hear. Oh, we heard you.
There you are.
Is it okay?
Yeah, can hear
Okay.
you now.
Yes. So do you have, of course, a lot of strong views about how this could be done, especially like in secondary schools. Of course, from my personal experience, I didn't receive any support for my stammering at all until I self-referred myself until I was 19 years old. So I was trying to think why didn't any teachers stop me? And I think it was a basic thing of it's a lack of awareness. I think a lot of teachers in school, they don't know how to deal or how to manage students with a variety of needs. I know there's a lot of training in school for kids with autism or dyslexia and stuff. So there are definitely parts of special needs that schools do take a lot more seriously. I think because it does have an impact on their exam results. And I personally do think stammering should be one of those key ones that should be taken a lot more seriously. So I do think it is definitely the responsibility of the school from the top. So it starts from the head teacher, and they need to ensure that the senior leadership are taking it seriously, because nothing can be done at the bottom if it's not taken very seriously at the top. And all schools do have a SENCO, so a person that's in charge of special needs in the school, and I would say it's definitely their job to try and ensure that staff are regularly given training, staff are educated about what stammering is. I'll give you an example. The past 3 schools that I've worked in, one of the first questions that I always gave to the SENCO was, how many students do you have that stammer? And in my first school, they told me it was 3, and I just did basic stammering awareness to staff, and within a couple of weeks the group grew from 3 to 10. And the shocking thing was, majority of them were in year 10 and year 11. So that means they've gone 3 years without being assessed, or any teachers, because teachers just need to send an email to a SENCO and say, oh, this student I've noticed has a stammer. It's as simple as that. In my second school, I started off with 4 students who stammered. Within a month, we had 17 students who stammered, and that was just to basic awareness, like nothing too fancy. I mean, it was just an email and a couple of videos. So, you know, it's just something that schools need to do, and it's something that I really want to try and do. So, like in my school, we have a few more schools that are part of our trust, and it's just me speaking with the Senko, and I'm literally, that makes the huge difference. And what I'm doing a bit more now is educating staff about reasonable adjustments that they can make. I don't think it's the student's job to tell the teacher that they stammer, because a lot of students they're probably just shy, or the confidence is low and they don't want to talk about it. So it's definitely, I'd say, the teacher's role to spot it and then try and get support for it.
Yeah, I'd just like to try and add to what Abed's said from an employment point of view, because of course all the children who are passing through schools will end up, or the majority of them will end up in employment, or even as employers and recruiters at some stage in the future. So clearly there is an argument for supporting children who stammer, and I think that there's an awful lot more that can be done to make the link between teaching and speech therapy, so that children are practicing their therapy in the classroom. But it's not just about the children who stammer, it's about the children who are around them in the classroom and what they learn about stammering and their attitudes towards stammering. And I know that, Abed, you've done a lot of work on that as well, because those children will become the recruiters and managers of and senior managers of tomorrow, so that the work that we do in education and in schools will also have an impact on what goes on in employment in future.
I strongly agree with that, because whenever I've done something for school assemblies, I've always told the students about 1 to 3% of you will stammer, but this still applies to 97% of you. That what can you do to make school a safe environment for students who stammer? So a lot of Senkos that I've spoken to, whenever I've spoken to about the fact they need to raise awareness of stammering, believe it or not, a lot of them say, "Oh, but we've only got one student who stammers, or 2 students, so we don't really need to do anything as a whole school." And I told them that's where you're going wrong. Or you still need to educate those that don't have a stammer, what they can do to make life much more simple for people who stammer. So I don't take that excuse at all.
Absolutely. I just wanted to just briefly make a point about what you said regarding maybe a teacher may notice that a student has a stammer, but many people with stammers, and I'm speaking from my own experience, in school I used to hide it, so people would have probably no idea that I even had one. So they're like, what can be done to help students like that, who are so ashamed that all they do is try to hide it. And also I noticed, Deborah, you wanted to also make a point there, so it'll be interesting to see what is your take, what can be done at university level to create that safe space and support and education.
Yeah, so it's really important. There are 2.3 million university students within the UK, and that means that if it's 1% of the school of the student population who stammer, that's 23,000 students who are in the university system who stammer. And I've done a number of events. I've done a number of events with Claire at Stuck, and you know, spoken to disability advisors, and I have yet to find one who tells me that they have worked with a student who stammers, and I wonder how that is possible. And that's what, so you know, that shows a real difficulty with those students, with, you know, any of those students coming forward to ask for assistance and to ask for reasonable adjustments. And so that's really worrying. And so there's a point there that I hope we come back to, which is about how do we get those reasonable adjustments in place. But it comes back to this issue about how do we understand the prevalence, and why people who stammer are not coming forward, and And from my perspective, and I've done focus groups with students, it's very often they bear a real burden of personal shame and personal responsibility about stammering, even though they should not. And so I agree very much with Abed. It's about changing the dialogue as a country, as as a population. If 1% of people stammer, and some prevalence estimates say it's as high as 3%, that is more than the percentage of people that have autism. So the percentage of people that have autism is about 1% of the population, 0.5 to about 1%. And we can argue all the time about prevalence. And this isn't about saying, look, one condition is more important than another. It's about reflecting on the fact that here is a condition that affects a huge proportion of people. And we as stammerers have been taught to believe that, we shouldn't think about it in the whole, that we take it as a personal issue, and it's not. It's something we all need to be educated about. And I wonder how we could have that awareness that of stammering, and of the need for people who do stammer be as at the same level as autism or other conditions. And that's what I'd hope for the future. And it's and I think a final thing I'd say is that's why I'm really pleased to see the Stammer campaign that BSA is doing, because it's about getting out there and changing our views as a society.
Could I just pick up on Deborah's point about reasonable adjustments, because of course that is also highly applicable to employment in the workplace as well. And the question of what actually resembles a stammering reasonable adjustment. And I think quite often it's not really known what you should be putting in place for somebody who stammers. I mean, I've heard it being suggested that there should be a meeting room kept empty with a telephone in case the person wants to go in to make a telephone call and doesn't want to do it in an open plan office. And I think quite often some of the sort of reasonable adjustments it's assumed that are required are quite heavy-handed, and actually it could just be as simple as making sure that a line manager or a recruiter approaches it and it is talked about and it is acknowledged rather than being hidden. And the reasonable adjustment could be as simple as that. So I think one of the things it is incumbent on employers and possibly universities and places of further education to do is to build up a stock of reasonable adjustments that could be put in place for people who stammer, so that they are ready to respond when a student or an employee makes that request. But of course, you could take it back to school as well. Does a child who stammers, do they learn to expect to be supported when they come forward for help? And if they haven't been adequately supported at school, then they're not going to come forward and ask for help at college or in a place of employment.
Suzana, I'm just going back to your question where you spoke about, what do we do then for students that don't speak up or don't speak at all because they feel really embarrassed. And I think Deborah, I think you mentioned something briefly about universities, and if a teacher does turn around and tell me that they don't have a student who's stammer, so I tend to just respond with a blunt question saying, "How do you know?" And then they'd be like, it's because, so we do encourage staff to make sure that they speak to all the students that they teach. There's something quite straightforward to do. So if a teacher does admit that they don't, I do always tell them, have you had a long enough conversation with all your students? So something that we do encourage staff to do is make sure that they do talk to children outside of the lessons, in the corridor, or when they're outside on duty. That's how you find out. And of course, we would really like to think that, and especially when they do start school in the new year, students do fill out a form, the parents do fill out a form to tell us if there are any needs that they've got. So that's the main way that we get it. But then there's always a few years then when the school didn't even know, and it's definitely the job of the teacher to try and figure out, and that can be simply done by just talking to your students.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just so important to create a safe space where people feel that they can talk about whatever it is that they're any challenges that they're going through. And that sort of brings me to the next issue, which is disclosure. So a person disclosing that they have a stammer, be it whether do that in school, university, or in the workplace. Is it something that you think is a good thing? It's a positive thing we should be doing more of? Has, like, just speaking from my own personal experience, I went to a careers advisor, and she had advised me if I could hide my stammer at the job interview, if that was possible, to ensure that I would have a better chance of getting the job, and then I can disclose once I've got the job. So it will be really interesting to hear what are your thoughts on disclosure.
I could respond on that. So I've got some historic examples which show how old I am, from the kind of late 90s, of being told in interviews, when it suddenly becomes clear that I have a stammer, and often after graduating I found myself in situations for jobs in financial services in the city, which is where I was targeting my efforts after graduating, doing everything I possibly could to hide my stammer. This was a couple of years after the Disability Discrimination Act had come into effect, so it probably wouldn't have been recognised in any of the banks in the cities, and being told 2 or 3 times in the interview that they basically needed someone for the job who could speak fluently. And I can sort of almost understand where they were coming from in cultural terms back then, but nonetheless, and that happened to me, had happened to me previously, and it has happened to me once or twice since, and each time that happens, in aggregate, it convinces you further that you're going to have to be fluent to be successful in a competitive recruitment selection process. But equally, more recently, some of the recruitment successes I've had have been where I haven't disclosed it as part of the application process, simply because I thought it might compromise my chances in a slightly kind of clandestine way, and I couldn't exactly say how. But as I've come into the interview room, I've committed to telling the panel one last thing before the interview starts. I may stammer, it's sometimes a bit more accentuated at interview, and on the 2 occasions I've done that most recently, I've got a job. So to me, it sort of doesn't matter when you disclose it, but you really should try and let the interview panel know before the interview process starts, partly because it's the fair thing to do from them, to enable them to make a really objective judgment of your competence.
Deborah, what about from the university perspective?
So I think it's really important from a university perspective to make a disclosure that you stammer, and that's for a range of reasons. I think that for those for those students who stammer, where there might be assessed oral presentations, for example, or where there's a lot of speaking in class, I think it's really important that we do get those reasonable adaptations in, and there are so many. The BSA on its website has got a huge list of things that lecturers can think about, that students themselves can come with, and really important that we listen to people that stammer and say, well, what would work better for you in this situation? So that disclosure, whether it's a formal disclosure and you're going to the disability services team, or whether it's an informal disclosure to your lecturer, either is good. And I would really encourage people to kind of reach out and to actually ask for help and assistance, because there are lots of ideas. And even if you can't think, if you're in a situation and you're thinking, actually, my stammer might affect me, so in this assessed presentation or in this piece of group work, and it might be hard for you to think through, well, actually, how could it be better? There are lots of really great ideas that other people have had and that other people have used. So I'd really say, disclosure of all kinds, the informal everyday and the formal, you're on a course or you get a job, is really important.
So what can be done about the mixed messages that people who stammer receive, in the sense that, when we go to stammering organizations or courses, we're very much encouraged to disclose, but then on the other hand, they're, like, in my experience, is told to to hide my stammer until you get the job. So it's almost like it's a little bit confusing what the best way forward is, and maybe what kind of advice or maybe ideas for employers or the educational system could be put in place to support people to have to make a positive disclosure that is not that it doesn't hinder their progress in any way.
Couple of quick points to raise there. I mean, I think generally societal attitudes and understanding of stammering, certainly from when I graduated and over the last 20, 25 years or whatever, have changed, and they're continually improving, and there is an ever better understanding across society about what stammering is really about, not least of all thanks to the amazing efforts of the British Stammering Association and the Stammer campaign in Action for Stammering Children and a whole raft of others. So I think that employers, and I imagine this probably applies to schools and universities as well, are more aware than they have ever been about what stammering really is. And that can only improve if our efforts to make it improve continue. But in terms of where you are deciding to disclose at some stage in the recruitment process that you have a stammer, I think also signposting the recruiter to where they can get more information from an authoritative source that really gives them an authoritative understanding about what stammering is, including that point we touched on earlier about the neurological root cause. I think that helps, because otherwise they're going to go on to Google, where you can find all kinds of stuff, largely in the spirit of our times, which will be fake news. So I think that it's absolutely crucial that you signpost them to, I would suggest, the Action for Stammering Children site or the Stammer website.
What I would say, I think, by the way, I'm in agreement with like all of you. I think sometimes we forget that the UK is definitely one of the most inclusive ever. I found that from experience. I do find that, majority of the UK, they are very like inclusive, and that does include schools. And I strongly advise, and I think there shouldn't be like any mixed messages at all, that the best advice is to always disclose it. I'm sure people that have a physical disability, they will definitely disclose it. So why shouldn't you, if you got a neurological thing like stammering. And the reason why I say that you should disclose it straight away, because you need to always give yourself the best chance as possible, and disclosing something is the first step to you really accepting who you are. Like, I didn't disclose anything about my stammer. I didn't even Google what a stammer was until I was 19 years old, because I was always living in denial. It was something that I just didn't want to talk about. The second that I spoke to someone about it, my speech and language therapist, that's when I started to feel a bit more better. So there's so many things that that can give you a slight more like an advantage. So for example, when I go to job interviews, I disclose it in the application form, because a majority of application forms should say, can we make or do any special arrangements for you? And I do say that I do have a stammer, so can you do this to support me? Firstly, apologies. Firstly, can you give me 30 seconds to think about my answer, and then I'll give you the answer. And that's something that is more than fine to do. And secondly, I do tell my employers, is it okay if I take in flashcards with notes, so I can just leave it in front of my table? Because interviews shouldn't be like a memorization game. It's not about memory. And what I found is that all my employees have always said yes to those two conditions. Now, what you can also do is, when you do write that in the form, there's nothing wrong with you directing your employers to the Stammer website or the British Stammering Association and say, if you go into this link, you can read about how you can support me. And I'd say 99% of the time, a lot of employees will take that into consideration. And something that Deborah mentioned, where she said that we should encourage people who stammer to seek support, and I strongly do agree with that. And I do say to some people who stammer that if you don't ask, or you don't get, it's as simple as that. Like, when I was in university, in my first year, I didn't seek support because I didn't want to feel as if I was being treated differently. But then when I got to my second year, I realized, okay, hang on, my modules are now going to count towards my degrees. So I want to give myself the best opportunity. So then I started to seek support, and I started to get 25% more time in my speaking presentations. And I genuinely do think that's what level of the playing field, and it did give me the good marks I really, really wanted. And I'm pretty sure that so many employers will hopefully change the way that they do things if you do ask. That's it, by the way.
Yeah. And I just wanted to bring up the point now about how we word requirements and criteria for applicants, be it for a university place or for a job. Because oftentimes a requirement is you must have excellent communication skills. So, but it's not, it's not really fully clarified. What does it actually mean to have excellent communication skills? Because communication is so much more than just being able to speak fluently. So I'd love to hear what is your take on this?
So I'll jump in first. I've got a real bee in my bonnet about this, particularly when it comes to to assessing progress and knowledge in universities. And so let's take a language degree, Arabic, okay? And I remember having a focus group in my previous university, and there was a student there doing Arabic, and he hadn't disclosed to his lecturer that he had a stammer, and there were oral presentations there, and the worry that I have is that even if it's not set out, even if fluency isn't one of the criteria, to what extent is that lecturer seeing hesitation and taking hesitation as not being confident or not knowing that what the word should be. And just to take that example further, we all know that there are people who speak Arabic as a home language who stammer. They are fluent in Arabic if they have hesitation. So fluency, it worries me so much how we you know, we equate fluency with knowledge or fluency with understanding. And a big thing that I'm really hoping that we do, and this is just in my space of universities, is we just get rid of fluency in our concepts of excellence, because I think we misunderstand it.
Well, I don't know if there's some kind of assessment framework for oral assessment of work at university, Deborah, but what I can say is until fairly recently in the oracy movement, proactive teaching of public speaking and conversational skills in schools, which I'm sure Abed will be cognizant of, in the oracy teaching framework, the word fluency was in there loud and clear. Some of us applied a bit of pressure on one or two people involved in oracy, and it's taken about a year or so, but they have now removed the word fluency, so it is no longer a standard that teachers are expected to achieve. But I do think excellent oral communication skills, this is, I'm not going to say a problem, but it's a continual challenge that we who stammer have got to complete, have got to continue hammering, because I think people who climb their way up to the top of the corporate hierarchy are going to be people who think they are, and who probably are, very polished speakers and presenters, and they can adapt their style, and they will see their fluency and their ability to speak in a fluent, confident, authoritative sounding way as having been instrumental to their success. And therefore, when they are assessing other people for their potential to climb up the ranks, they are quite likely to be looking out for that same characteristic. And I don't think I'm talking out of turn there, because how else would the word fluency have appeared in the oracy teaching framework, which has been pulled together in consultation with large employers? So I think that is an area that we have got to campaign on more strongly. And when I've spoken to immediate colleagues who've been putting out job adverts and putting that expression in there, they've just cut and pasted it from another job advert. And when you ask them, what are you actually expecting to see, they don't have an answer.
It's true. I can definitely relate to that, because at the amount of times I've seen job descriptions for teachers, and some of the wording that they use, I can tell that it's just a copy and paste job, and it's usually done, and I'm not saying it's their fault, but it's usually done from the personal assistance of head teachers, and I'm just thinking whether they do need to definitely look at what they put out, because it does put a lot of people who stammer back away from applying. And some of what we've just all spoken about, it's sad that it's definitely something in society that we do measure success by fluency. And I've always said that, I go, why do we measure success by fluency? Some people have the gift of gab, and they can sound like they know what they're talking about. Like, I'll be honest, in meetings, I don't tend to talk much unless that I know what I have to say is really, really important and something valuable. So I can definitely say, if I do speak like in meetings, it's because I have something really valuable to say. Because I'll be honest, I'm probably, and a lot of people who stammer are probably better listeners, let's just say. And just because you're fluent doesn't mean that you're a good speaker. I'm sure that we've all heard fluent people who talk in lectures or speeches, and we just probably get bored of like a monotonous tone, or so just because you're fluent doesn't mean you're a good speaker. People who stammer can be a lot more better speakers than people who want. And just to go on what I said, is that we do definitely need to campaign a lot more of how wording is done in job descriptions. So something like what the Stammer has done with Wikipedia was get rid of that negative sort of stuff. And schools, workplaces should definitely take care a bit more when they're writing out job descriptions and what they expect.
Yeah, for sure. And so if like fluency isn't a key component for good communication, then how would you describe, what are the qualities of an excellent communicator?
I can come in first. So I think being an excellent communicator is being an excellent listener. It's what Abed has just said. Often, we often talk about the negatives of having a stammer, but there are positives, and I think one of them is actually about becoming a good listener. Being empathetic and being resilient. I think having a stammer for me has given me great problem solving skills. I never expect things to be easy, and so when they're not, that's fine. I kind of pick myself back up and I carry on. And so so being a good communicator is being a good listener, but there are lots of other skills, and those public speaking skills, they can be learned. And actually, I'm going to put a question back to Suzana, because so I'm also part of the Toastmasters network, and it's a really fabulous place to learn public speaking skills. One of the things that I know she's been involved with, and actually she's designed, is a particular public speaking course for people who stammer. And I wonder if, how could we get more people who stammer involved in those sorts of initiatives? Because it's about all of us having more confidence to actually get our message across, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I completely agree with you. I mean, for me, communication isn't just about fluent speech. It's obviously with the content that you're speaking on, is obviously important, but there's so many things. How you use your voice, vocal variety, body language, just your overall presence can say so much. And as as you're a part of Toastmasters, we get to see many different public speakers, and especially those of them who are fluent aren't necessarily the most effective communicators. So I think communication is such a broad skill set, and it's really important to be able to clarify and also celebrate those different attributes of great communication.
Yeah, there are two other things I'd just like to throw in. One is about preparation, and I think there's a sort of myth out there that really good public speakers are just able to stand up and talk about anything at a moment's notice, and there may be some people who are able to do that, but most people who you think are amazing speakers have actually put in, often in private, an awful lot of preparation and structured out and worked out the key points that they're going to cover. And I've had to do lots and lots of talks over the years, and I've learned that when I prepare and I rehearse without over rehearsing, and I have a sense of the structure and the framework in which I'm going to be speaking, I find my fluency levels are generally very much better, because I'm not having to waste lots of neural activity and thinking what I'm about to say next. The other quick point is also about being sensitive to the people you're speaking to, whether that's in a conversational situation or whether that's being able to read an audience of 200 people. I think the principles of that are not dissimilar, and I like to think that one of the strengths of people who stammer, you do learn to be quite sensitive to the reactions and the responses and the facial mannerisms of the people that you're speaking to, so you know when it's time to change your tack or go to the audience for a question or whatever. So I think sensitivity to audience is a strength that people who stammer can bring.
Yeah, and let's not forget what communication actually means. I think a lot of us straight away think, yeah, it's when you're speaking. Communication is when you're like exchanging information via writing, speaking, sign language. So it's not just speaking, but we just assume that it's speaking. Then you can, like what we teach kids a lot is part of communication is simple things like maintain a natural eye contact with the person that you're speaking with, sit up when you're speaking, don't slouch, all that sort of stuff is things that people can do that does contribute to communication.
And also brings me into just thinking about, like, just from the school system, how are we teaching communication, from an early age? What does it mean, whenever we're teaching a student what it means to be a great communicator? Is there some room for change there, or just further progress on that?
I can't say what in primary school, but I'm pretty sure that schools do, like, always encourage the basic things, like, and we always do it as secondary school teachers, is make sure you write and talk in full sentences, and make sure that you like, do we really focus a lot of time in improving communication in schools? I don't think so. I think it's just something that we assume that kids know how to do. We just assume that it's something that they should be able to pick up, but you'd be surprised a lot. You'd be surprised that a lot don't. And if we can tell that some students are generally struggling with some sort of communication, then they do get speech and language therapists involved. But to, like, answer your question, I wish I could say a lot more about what schools are doing to improve communication. I know some schools do have debate societies and things like that, and I'm pretty sure the teacher would obviously give some advice on the best ways to do that, but I think a lot more needs to be done.
It is something that I think is being addressed through the oracy movement, which I understand, Abed, is becoming kind of more rooted into the national curriculum, and there are a number of organizations out there which are helping teachers with proactive teaching of oracy, the ability to present in front of your classmates, conversational skills. So I think there is a growing movement out there, because undoubtedly it is a skill which employers are ever more interested in and prioritizing. But the key is that it is taught in such a way that it doesn't penalize children who stammer, and that it's actually an opportunity for them. It ought to be a really golden opportunity for a child who stammers to develop really good presentational skills from the start. I don't think it's completely as sensitive as it could be to stammer, as it could be towards stammering, but I think it's improving.
Yeah. Thank you for that. We will be wrapping up soon, so we've got a few questions here. We've had a question come in, and it says, how serious a stammer would a student or worker need to have to get some reasonable adjustment and support? And if a person only has a mild stammer, would they be able to get help for this? Is there a different issue if we're dealing with a mild stammer or a more severe stammer?
I could pick that up from a student perspective in university, and then others might want to comment from their perspective. So it's really important that we're led by the experience of that person themselves. And so, someone might have a mild stammer and find that that it puts them off participating still, that they'd be worried about participating. That might affect the way that they're perceived in terms of their effort in class. There might be some group projects where they feel a bit excluded. That's enough. So that's enough. It's not about the degree or some ability to measure. And I don't think anyone's ever been able to measure a stammer, what's mild and what's not. But we know there's a spectrum, okay? But crucially, it's about, how is it affecting your ability to participate? And that should be the test within a university. And if you think it's affecting your ability, that's enough.
Yeah, I would completely second that view. From an employment perspective, I think it's quite easy to get into a job, into a corporate career, and to muddle through with a stammer without perhaps ever really thinking about how much it's holding you back relative to your colleagues. And in my case, I mean, you know, at times my stammer has hardly been there at all. At times when I've been going through periods of not having enough sleep, it's been so accentuated that some days I've hardly been able to string two words together. So I think it's just the fact that someone is prone to stammering. I don't think that it's possible to create any criteria that might make somebody entitled to a greater level of support. I think that the employer or whoever has just got to be open to the fact that person needs support.
I think the best thing to say is a stammer is a stammer. That's it. Yes, we might have a wide spectrum of people who stammer, but the feelings behind the people who stammer are the same. And the feelings of embarrassment at times, the feeling that you feel frustrated, that's all the same. It doesn't matter if you have a mild stammer or a severe stammer at all.
Yeah.
We just have one more question, and it's how can we more effectively celebrate and profile to employers the strengths that stammers can bring to public speaking?
Ooh, I think we've got to get ourselves out there. I'm not deliberately trumpeting stuff that I have done recently, but I did get the opportunity, thanks to Norbert Liekveld, when he was chief executive of the British Stammering Association, to do a TEDx talk, which is up there on YouTube if you're interested. And although I didn't stammer as much as I would like to have done in that talk, I hope I was able to get across the fact it is possible to speak and you don't have to be entirely fluent. But I think we have got to get ourselves out there and start talking publicly about stammering in front of groups of people who do not stammer, and I'm going to put it as bluntly as that.
Are there any closing points from Deborah or Abed?
So I guess I'd like to talk about the positives and about the negatives as well. So, you know, it's great we've had the British Stammering Association has the campaign, you know, I'm an engineer, I'm a teacher, you know, that's great. And actually those posters around, you know, and, you know, having that visibility is really good, and working with career services I think would be excellent, and I wonder if we can do more of that. But you know, I'd also like to see more visibility on the side of employers actually reflecting on the fact that they are discriminating. So you know, it would be great if we took some of those all the way through. So in the same way we've done with, for example, in coffee shops, when people have been made to feel humiliated, that sort of social media campaign. It's great because I think that when you look at change, it isn't just the positives, all the nice stuff. Sometimes it's about coming in with, you know, with the hard word. It's about saying, actually, that's not acceptable. And I'd say that we need a mixture of both. We need to remind employers of what their duties are, as well as holding up those shining and lovely examples. And I say, look, we've got several of us here, and we've got loads more that the British Stammering Association have brought together. So let's have both. Let's remind employers they need to stick to their legal duties, and also have that lovely universe of people who stammer who are doing excellent jobs.
Yeah.
Abed?
What I would just say is the question that was given about celebrating the strengths that people who stammer can bring. Yes, I do agree with that, but I think what we need to also, will not celebrate, but just acknowledge that it's okay to not speak fluently. That it's okay to struggle to speak fluently, and that it's okay if you just can't communicate well at that certain time. But I know that you can communicate at a better time in the day. So it just that fact that we should be accepting that it's fine to struggle or to speak fluently, because that's just the way that we talk, and we shouldn't have to change the way that we are for people to really like accept us.
I think we need a stammering in schools champion, and I think that Stammer teacher could step into that vacancy quite easily.
I'm my best.
Thank you very much. I'd like to just thank all of the panelists for their time and sharing their experience and advice. It's been really, really fantastic. And thank you to all the participants who joined this webinar and contributing their questions and comments. If you'd like to know more, you can contact the Stamma helpline. There's also a web chat as a source of further information and support. And both services are open each weekday from 10 a.m. to 12 noon and 6 p.m. until 8 p.m. And there's also a short survey to be filled out as well. I think Chris.
Yeah, I can just talk about that very briefly. We just wanted to have the opportunity just to let you know if you are looking for some more information that's out there. My name's Kirsten and I work for Stammer, trying to get my screen to behave in the way I'd like it to now, but of course it's going to be awkward. But there are pages on the website which are specifically targeted at employers and at tutors. So you can find some of these in the for professionals section of the website. And as you can see, there are pages targeted at teachers, at tutors and lecturers, employers and HR professionals. So there is more information available on the website there. There's also some information about stammering in the law related to the Equality Act, if that's of interest, understanding more about that. And yes, as Suzana mentioned, there will be a post-webinar survey. It's really short, but we're aware we didn't kind of have the opportunity to cover all of the questions. So if you want us to follow up with you, if you can write your question in the survey and give us your contact details, because the survey is it's anonymous. So if you don't give us your contact details, we won't be able to find you. Yeah, but if you let us know, we will get back in touch with you. Thank you. So that's the end of the seminar. Thank you very much. You're all welcome to go about your business. Happy Stammering Awareness Day.
Happy ISAD 20.
Yeah, thank you very much. This was great. Bye.